chapter 13 is basically on relationship development. So this is going to be talking about interpersonal relationships. And as you can see, like in the book, it talks about interpersonal relationships both include social relationships and intimate relationships. So social relationships are going to be more like people that you just talk to at work or maybe school, or just kind of those people that you know that they're acquaintances, but they're not really close friends. And then you're going to have the more intimate ones, which are going to be maybe your family, romantic partners, your closest friends, people that you spend a lot of time with. I kind of think of it as I've gotten older, I realized that, I might have a big group of friends. Even like think about social media. You have like this massive group of friends on social media, and then maybe in like everyday life you have maybe a little, obviously a smaller one. But then if you think about truly like who you consider to be your people, that just they continues to get smaller and smaller till you get to a point that if you said like these are my closest people, that group's going to be very small. So that's kind of what this chapter is talking about, and how those relationships develop through our communication. So we're going to be talking about how we can better those, talk about some theories on how it actually happens, like how those relationships develop, how we can strengthen them, so that we're aware when we are communicating in these relationships, how we're making people feel, and or how we can strengthen those relationships. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the functions of these relationships. So first of all, interpersonal relationships help us create and maintain identity. So if you remember when we talked about the chapter on perception, we talked about identity is created through what we display about ourselves, like maybe our clothes, how we dress, how we do our hair, all those things, but then also how we communicate about ourselves, what we share with others, how we communicate, but also what people say about us, how people speak over us. I talked about how, even thinking about kids, as a parent, when you speak over your child, speak something over your child, like you're like, oh, you're really good at math. Maybe then your kid's gonna try really hard at math. Like those kinds of things can become our identity. And so when we have really close friends, or people that were, I guess not just friends, but interpersonal relationships, we start to create an identity within these relationships. And we have an identity that goes across kind of all of our relationships, but we also have these, a little bit more constructed identities for each individual person, like how you communicate with this person versus this person. Or if you've ever had a friend from different phases of life, meet a friend from your phase of life now. Like it's kind of different. Your identity is a little bit different, but there's still like a core string that goes across all of them. But also another function is that it helps fulfill the need to belong. So if you remember in the very first chapter, we talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is a triangle that has different levels and different needs. And so the very first one, the biggest, and the foundation is physiological. So that's going to be water, air, food, like what we need to survive. Then the next layer is going to be safety needs. And then the next layer is going to be the need to belong. And so in that section, that's where we have that need to find friends, to communicate, to share our feelings. This is kind of where building communities is really important, which is the next thing we're going to talk about. But no matter what, even if you consider yourself like a loner type person, you still have your people, right? We still want to belong. Nobody wants to live in total isolation. That's why isolation is a form of punishment, right? Sitting in timeout, or being in jail and being in solitary confinement. Those are things that we realize as humans that psychologically we need to belong. We need to have relationships, which leads us to the creation of communities. So communities can be just strictly where you're at community, but also like, the community you live in. I live in a neighborhood, that's a community. But you could also be people who share your demographics or your hobbies, or maybe you are part of a social group or anything. That's a community. You become close to that community. The book also talks about excommunication, and I know we kind of think about that as church is excommunicating people, but basically that just is referring to, every community kind of has a set of rules that you go by. I even think about my on Halloween, my community, my neighborhood has a Facebook page, and I was not a member yet but I wanted to post on the page. So I had to answer all these questions and agree to all these things to be part of the Facebook group. And one of the things that the group asked was, these are the rules. Will you be respectful? Will you do these things? And that was kind of them defining what our community wanted. Now, and if I were to go against that, then I would be technically excommunicated or, unfriended from that group. Like they would kick me out of the group. And that's kind of the same concept, even though that's social media. The same concept kind of happens if you have friends that are like your community. If you were to start acting inappropriately in those situations, then the community would obviously probably tell you this is not acceptable. You can either adhere to the quote unquote rules, the unsaid rules probably, or we're probably going to distance ourselves from you. Now, this obviously might not be a full conversation, but that's what happens. So that's the same concept of excommunication. And if you think about just even that name, excommunication, if you break that in two, that just means like X not communicating, right? Because as we'll find out later, relationships are built on communication. All right, so then provide rewards and costs. No matter what relationship we're in, relationships require costs, and it also gives to rewards, right? So costs are often just the mirror image. The book says this is just the mirror image of the reward. While being able to lean on a friend and tell them everything that's going on, which is great, like having my best friend who I'm going to use as an example throughout the course of this lecture, Holly, she's been one of my absolute best friends. I lean on her a lot. I share a lot with her. I tell her what I'm going through and vice versa. But in doing so, that's also technically a cost because she's having to give up her time, her energy. She's having to devote like the time that time is a precious commodity, right? Like she has to give up that time to spend with me, to listen to me, while she might not even view that as a cost. And you probably have a close friend or family member or relationship or romantic partner that you wouldn't even view listening to them or spending time with them as a cost. But technically that is a cost, because if you think about it in a different relationship that maybe someone you're not as close with, they want you to go to lunch and you really just don't have time because you're so busy. Then you see obviously that time is a cost. So it just depends on the relationship, how much you're willing to give kind of makes you outweigh is the benefits or the awards more than the cost. And if that's the case, then we'll do it. Right. And then sometimes relationships end up ending because of this, because the costs just outweigh the rewards that you're getting. Maybe you're giving a lot to the relationship, but you feel like the other person is not. You're trying to be there for that person, support them, but the other person is not. And there's a million reasons why sometimes the costs outweigh the rewards or the benefits. But that is what tends to happen when a relationship ends. And maybe not just because of like you had a big fight or something, but just it ends because you just feel like you can't give as much as the other person wants. Like the costs are just too great. All right, so those are the functions. Now we're going to talk about several different types of theories that go into how relationships develop. So attraction theory is the first one. So as we go on, you'll see how each one of these kind of get more involved, or they're a little bit deeper. So the first kind of just basic level idea of interpersonal relationship theory is attraction theory. So attraction, when we think of that, we think of it as romantic, as, oh, I'm attracted to that person. But attraction is really just thinking about, what draws you to somebody. So it's not necessarily just romantic, like your friends or anybody that you met that you've become close with. You've been attracted to them, like you were drawn to that person, and that's why you became friends with them. So I just want to keep that in mind, both romantic and just friendship level. So, okay, so there's three different types of interpersonal attraction. The first kind is social. And so the book talks about social being just that you see the other person as someone whom you would like to engage with in social interactions and be friends with. So you might just see their personality, you see things that they're doing, and you just like them and you want to engage with that person. So bringing up my friend Holly, like I told you about, she and I can just very distinctly remember how we became friends. And so that's why I like to use her as an example. But she and we went to the same middle school, and we didn't technically meet there. That's where I remember meeting her, but apparently I knew her when I was younger. And she didn't quite like me because I wasn't that nice, I guess, at the time, or I was a show off, as she liked to say. But then when we got older, I met her in 7th grade, and we were in class, a lot of classes together. Basically, our whole schedule was the same. And I remember just watching her in class and seeing how she interacted with people. And I just thought she was really nice, and she was funny, and she was smart. And I just felt like, oh, that's like how she was socially kind of drew me to her. And I was interested in becoming her friend. Then there's the physical aspect. So again, when we think physical, we think of just attraction, as in, I find that person physically attractive, I would like to date them. It's not the same thing. Like physical, that's obviously a part of it, but physical can also be like, I see similarities between us. I just like things about you, because at the end of the day, their physical qualities is the first thing that people see, right? Whether we mean for it to be that way or not, we do notice that stuff. But it also helps us kind of identify. So like Holly and I dress very similar. I thought she dressed cute. I like the way she did her hair. Just like little things like that I was like, oh, I like that about her. I want to get to know her. And maybe other people in your life, like maybe you really saw that about them, and so therefore you were attracted to them. I'm just saying, in this particular example, I remember that I liked how she dressed, I liked how she did her hair, those kinds of things. And then there's the aspect of task attraction. And so task attraction means that you are going to be, you like the way, like you like to work with them, you can count on them to do their job. So like if somebody's at your work, maybe you're drawn to a particular person because they work hard, or say you're in a small group situation working on a class project, you may be, if you're a hard worker, you're probably drawn to the person that is also a hard worker, and so maybe you two work together a lot. But for Holly and I remember Holly was just, incredibly smart. She was going to be one day our valedictorian. She's valedictorian of her class in college at UAMS. Like literally everything she could be academically, she was. And so I just remember I really admired that about her, and I liked working with her. And because she brought out the creative side with me, like she would do creative things, and I liked working with her. So anyways, those three things initially is what kind of attracted me to want to be friends with Holly. And so again, I also want to say, even though all three of these things were something that drew me to Holly, not all three things are going to be apparent for everybody. Like say someone at work, you may just be attracted to them because of task, not necessarily because of social or physical, just the task aspect, right? So you kind of think about that too. Like it can just be one thing, not all three together. All right, so then you have factors influencing attraction. So the first one's going to be appearance. Like I said earlier, that's just the first thing that we see, not trying to be shallow. It's just what we notice. It's what kind of draws you to people, to know that you are similar. And I'm not talking about physically like skin tone and all of that. I'm talking about maybe you just see someone that's wearing similar clothes to you. Maybe you notice that like especially let's say if you wear athletic gear a lot and you're into sports, and you notice someone else who's wearing something similar, you might be attracted to that person. Or my husband once told me he went to Iceland, and he was in this bar, and he looked over and there's a guy wearing a Razorback. Well, of course he was like, my people, right? Like he was like, hey, I'm from Arkansas. He wanted to know that person. And so that is also an appearance thing, but it can also be, you were physically just attracted to their appearance. And then similarities. Well, the book, between appearance and similarities, the book also mentions proximity. And so proximity is talking about just sometimes you become friends with people or attracted to people that are just because they're the people who are around you. Social media, like dating apps and stuff, has really broadened that. But if you think about like where you went to elementary school, like your friends that you became friends with, you probably became friends with them because of proximity, like that, people in your class were who you spent every day with. So of course you were going to be attracted and find friends within that group. All right, so then similarities. So this isn't just talking about like, oh, you're exactly like me and I just have to be, it's more so, do you have similar hobbies or upbringings, backgrounds? Do you have similar viewpoints? Do you have similar, it's all those types of things. When you start talking with someone, you'll kind of gauge whether or not you see things eye to eye. And there's some things that are really important that I think you have to become really good friends. You have to have some similarities because you have to have things to talk about. But also say if you are really about kindness and genuineness, and then someone else is really about like money and having things, and you don't really like that, then that's probably not going to be a great relationship because you don't have a whole lot of similarities on like values, right? So that's going to be why similarity is a good thing. On the opposite side, there's also complementary differences, and this isn't necessarily just this idea that opposites attract, like, oh, because one person's a talker and the other person isn't, and they like each other. I mean, that sometimes happens, and even granted, like my husband and I are kind of like that. Like I definitely talk more than my husband. He's more of a listener, which is great. However, when it talks about complementary differences, it's not just talking about that we have differences in how much we talk. It's really what makes it a good relationship is I like the fact that Andrew, my husband, doesn't is a good listener. Not that he doesn't talk, but that because he does talk, but I mean, not that he's just not a talkative person. It's that he is a good listener, and I want to be a good listener. So really what this is talking about is that you find people that have attributes that may be different than you, but you respect, that you like, that you want to emulate. And so because of that, you're drawn to it. Like I know I used to not be as good of a listener. And I've always loved that Andrew was, so that's always drawn me to him. I feel like all of my closest friends have that. They have something that maybe I'm not quite as good at, or that isn't inherently who I am, but they are, and it's drawn me to that person. Like another one of my best friends, Kaylee, man, I am like the procrastinator to the nth degree. She is like, get it done 3 weeks early, and then it might still be a little late to her, right? And I love that about her. I want to emulate that. That really driven aspect of her has drawn me to her. So you see, like, it's not necessarily that we're just different and that's why we get along. It's that there's this complementary aspect where I want to be more like her, and Chad probably has some qualities she wants, that she's drawn to, right? That's not like her, but that she likes. Okay, so the next theory is uncertainty reduction theory. So after that, so that's just kind of like what initially attracts us. This is talking about like, okay, say I've just been initially attracted to this person. Now we go into when we get to know each other, or we start to get to know people, the very first thing that we want to do, or that this theory says that we're doing, is that we want to reduce uncertainty about them. We want to know them better. We want to understand who they are, and we immediately go into that. So if you think about it, I mean, think about a person, imagine a person you just met, or a time that you've met somebody. Initially, what you immediately do is you start asking questions. One, because you don't know what to talk to them about, but also you want to try to understand who they are. And before we want to put a whole lot of our time and investment into somebody, if we're completely honest, we want to understand exactly who they are. I mean, think about dating someone for the first time, going on a first date, especially if it's a blind date, you didn't know them before. You immediately want to kind of figure out, who is this person? What are they like? And we do that with two things. So there's two types of uncertainty that we're trying to reduce. The first one is cognitive. So that's how do they think, right? I want to know what you think about things. It says in the book that cognitive uncertainty occurs when we do not know what the beliefs and attitudes of the other person are. So immediately we're going to want to we're trying to get to a point where we understand, who are you at your center? Like, what are your values? What kind of person are you? What do you believe? What do you think? Right? That's the cognitive. And then there's the behavioral, and that's going to be, this occurs when we do not know how the other person will behave in a particular situation. So as you get to know people, you start learning their personality. You start learning how they behave, how they're going to react. And that's something we also want to reduce uncertainty. That's why if somebody acts unfamiliar, say that you and your friend have been friends for a long time, and all of a sudden they act odd, like you notice that immediately because it's different than what they normally do, because you've already gone through this whole stage with them, all these stages with them of reducing uncertainty. So then when they act different, it's weird. All right, so there's 3 different stages. The first one's going to be entry level, and so this is going to be just like the basic, getting the kind of the like the really, not shallow, I don't say shallow conversation, but just like the everyday, like, hi, how are you? And just kind of getting to know them. There's a word I'm trying to remember that they say. It says that in this stage of uncertainty reduction theory, during which we follow culturally accepted rules of interaction and politeness, including greetings, greeting one another, making small talk. That's what I was trying to think of, and laughing at jokes. Okay, so and initially when you meet someone, you are just trying to create small talk, right? You're just trying to figure out, because you're searching for topics, like what can I connect with them on, right? Initially, when we start trying to reduce uncertainty, what we're really doing is find similarities, or even just try to figure out things to talk about. But I think initially we're kind of trying to find, where can I connect? Or at least that's what I do. Where can I connect it? Oh, I can connect there. Let's talk about that, right? So there's that entry level. And then once you get past that, you go to a personal level. And so the personal level is when we begin to explore the other person's attitudes and beliefs while also disclosing some of that same information about ourselves. So going back to Holly and I, so when I first got to start knowing her, I was in that entry level, and then say we started eating with each other at lunch. Then we start spending the night with each other. That's when we started getting more into that personal, where we're asking questions, we're learning about each other, we're learning about each other's upbringings, our backgrounds, our beliefs, what we think, all of it. That's like that personal space. And then it got to a point where you kind of decide, okay, this relationship is going to continue, we're going to be friends, or you exit out. And so that exit stage is both. It doesn't mean that the relationship ends. It just means that you're exiting out of this uncertainty reduction space. It means that, okay, now we're ready to be friends and we're just going to grow this relationship, or like, we're going to go our separate ways. Right. So that's where you start. You start in this getting to know you, and then you decide where the relationship's going to go from there, whether it's romantic or it's friendship based. But then you keep going. And I will say, when you become friends with somebody, if you've ever had a point in your life where you feel like maybe you're kind of changing, your personality's changing. I don't know, like if you've ever kind of just had this moment of growth where you're like, I want to be a better person. And then you start hanging out with some of your old friends, and then your old friends are thinking, hey, you're acting really weird. You don't act like who you normally act like. And they start questioning it. It's not necessarily that they don't want you to change. I mean, sometimes, granted, that might be the case, but sometimes it's just because you are now going outside of their norm. All of a sudden, there's all this uncertainty about you. And so what it's really doing is it's forcing you then to go back to like this personal level, or this entry/personal level of uncertainty reduction theory. Like they're going into, okay, now I have to relearn you. I have to figure out who you are again, right? And that is kind of frustrating for them, because you've always been one way. We don't like uncertainty. But if you'll continue being who you want to be and continue trying to show them the new you, then eventually they'll hopefully get to that exit stage and realize, okay, this is the new person that I know. And they'll accept that. I mean, sometimes they don't, and that's where the relationship ends and they have to go their separate way and you go yours. But a lot of times, if you'll just stick to your guns and continue on being you, then hopefully if they really love you and want to be your friend, then they'll accept that new version of you and they'll kind of go along with you in this new route. All right, so there is 3 ways that we start to reduce this uncertainty. You first probably do this passively. So like watching someone kind of, that sounds kind of creepy, but you do kind of like notice people. And a good way to talk about this, I guess, would be my husband and I. So I remember meeting my husband in 11th grade, I guess going into 12th grade. And we were like, every time I saw him, I just noticed him and I was really nervous around, because I was just like, oh, I like him, but I don't know, and so I was just kind of watching him kind of from afar and getting to see what he did, see who he was. It's not like actively trying to engage him, just kind of watching. And so the book says that passive means unobtrusively observing the other person. And then the next stage is going to be active, and that is engaging in activities to learn more about the other person while avoiding direct contact with him or her. So again, with my husband, when we were going into senior year, I was nervous to get to really know, like to talk to him. So because I wanted to know more about him, I would go and talk to all of his friends, or talk to my friends who knew him. Like, so what do you think about Andrew? What do you think about, like, who is he? Like, what does he do? And they would tell me all this information, but I wasn't actually engaging with him. Well, then finally, one of my friends, we were at a party, one of my friends was like, Helen, you gotta talk to him. I was like, oh, I'm too nervous. And he walked by and she goes, you know what? Hey, Andrew, sit down, talk to Helen. And she just walked away. It was really awkward, but it was a good thing, right? And it forced us into this interactive phase where we then actually had to communicate. And the book says that the interactive is engaging in direct contact or face-to-face conversation with the other person. So finally, I was actually speaking with him, getting to know him personally. Also, this happens with friendships, same thing with Holly. I kind of watched her in class and kind of got to know her that way. And then I actively sought out, what more information about her, and then interacted with her. But sometimes we kind of fly through the first and we just interact. Like, it doesn't have to go through those 3 stages. I tend to be just a kind of like quick observe and then interact, right? Kind of get just an overall picture, and then I'm going to interact with you and get to know you better. And that might be the case too. So it doesn't have to necessarily all 3 stages have to happen. That's just how it can happen. All right, then we have social penetration theory. So this is going even a little deeper. So this is now we're friends, or we're dating or whatever. And this is where it's talking more about developing and maintaining a relationship. And so once you become friends, once you exit out of that uncertainty avoidance, like that uncertainty avoidance stage, and you're now into actual like friendship and relationship, you have to start communicating with people about things and going deeper with them. And so you notice it says breadth and depth determines the stage. So what that means is, now that you're friends, or now that you're dating, like, you're communicating more, you're talking more, you're sharing more about yourselves. And the broader you go and the deeper you go, the closer the relationship's going to be, and the deeper into each of these stages you're going to go. Right. So self-disclosure is super important when it comes to interpersonal theory and just interpersonal relationships. Self-disclosure is is just communicating with others. It's talking about yourself, hearing, not just about yourself, but also hearing them, like basically yourself disclosing information to somebody. You're sharing about your life and you're listening to other people about their lives. If you've ever met somebody for the first time and say afterwards, you're like, oh my goodness, I feel like I knew them forever. It's probably because it feels like you just kind of got like to these deeper stages of social penetration theory a lot faster. Like, you got deeper with that person really fast. Or maybe you could talk about a lot of things very easily with the person. But as you self-disclose, as you start to get to know someone better, you go through these different stages. So the first one's going to be orientation stage. And so again, this is kind of the entry level. Let me go ahead and skip over that page. It says, in this stage, individuals engage in small talk and follow social norms for appropriateness and social desirability. So this is just kind of like the face-to-face, like, hey, how are you? Getting to know you. Like Holly and I getting to know each other in class, maybe at lunch, talking about stuff, but not necessarily going too deep. The next one, though, the exploratory affective exchange stage, is where you start going a little deeper. Right now we're getting some depth. And maybe like the first one's you just kind of getting more of a breadth, like getting more topics to talk about. But the next stage, now we're going a little deeper and going a little more further out. So this is going to be where, in this stage, individuals begin to reveal themselves by sharing personal attitudes and opinions just about like any kind of topic. So there's kind of that moment where you have to decide, I'm going to share information about my opinion. Some people, that's not an issue. They'll share their opinions. Some people, like, it's, you're really starting to open up, you're kind of showing something about yourself, and you're wondering if they're going to accept that, if they're going to like it, right? And so you're kind of trusting that. If they react positively, then it's a great thing. If they react negatively, then you probably, either that relationship's not going to go a whole lot further, or you're just not going to talk about those things. And then there's effective exchange stage. And that is going to be, in this stage, individuals begin talking about private and personal matters. So this is when your relationship starts getting deeper and you start getting really close. Now, if you can notice, these are kind of like your social circles, like the bigger social circle, and then smaller. And this is even smaller. This is where they actually know what's going on in your life. You know what's going on in theirs. You're talking more. You share more about things. But then there's an even closer stage, and this is the stable exchange stage. And that is, individuals have a deep level of trust and are sharing their deepest personal thoughts, beliefs, and values with one another. This is like the person these are the people that you are the closest to you. These are your very best friends, hopefully your romantic partner that you're very close with, maybe your family, like these are the people that know you best, that you share everything with. And you notice each of these stages, it all has to do with self-disclosure, how much you share with that person and how much you know about them. And then the last thing is deep penetration stage. And this is when individuals begin to withdraw from a relationship and stop disclosing information to one another. So this doesn't happen necessarily in every stage, right? Or in every relationship. I mean, you're going to be friends with some people forever. You might obviously be romantically involved with someone for forever. And hopefully with your family, be close to your family forever. Like, that is something that those relationships hopefully won't change. Now, some relationships will be seasons, and sometimes they will kind of go their separate ways, or sometimes romantic relationships end and you break up. So that's part of that deep penetration theory. But there's also just the idea that relationships have those ups and downs, right? So sometimes with friends, you're closer at times than you are at other times. And a lot of times that has to do with self-disclosure. How much time are you spending together? How much are you sharing with one another? Those kinds of things. Okay, so then we have the stage model of relationship development, and this is another theory, and you can see on the next slide, here's kind of the picture that's also in the book. Let me skip over to that. So yeah, so that's also another, so you can look at it. I'll come back to that in a second. But here, this is the coming together stage. So this stage model talks about two. So all these other ones kind of have just been talking about how you kind of come together, how it grows, how it develops, and then just kind of like a basic, like, and then it ends. Right, this one kind of goes more in detail. So there's a coming together stage, and this is the initiating is the first one. So just like the others, this is kind of the entry level. This is when you take the first step to interact with someone you were interested in. You know, like with Holly, is coming up to her and be like, hey, you know, you want to eat lunch together? Like talking to her, maybe just asking her questions, maybe not asking her to eat lunch yet, but just talking to her. And there's experimenting stage. And and I will say this particular, I guess I should talk more about a romantic relationship. This particular stage model usually has more to do with romantic relationships. However, I think that it does still apply with friendships as well. So I will change to a romantic type of example. Okay, so with the initiating, my husband and I, Andrew, when we first met, when we first started talking, so now we're just getting to know each other, we're talking and communicating some. And then the experimenting stage. So this is where you engage in conversation about surface level interests and topics with the other person to see if your interest is expanded or not. So like that day I just studied, my friend just sat Andrew down next to me and was like, hey, y'all two, you just talk and whatever, and walked away. So we started talking, we started just kind of communicating about things, and we started texting some and talking on the phone. And like in that stage, we were just kind of throwing things out there, communicating, trying to figure out more about each other. Then there's intensifying stage. So you invest more time in each other, learn more about a person's history, interests, and goals. So then we started really hanging out. Like I remember there was a point that then I started actually going and seeing him, or him coming to see me, just us two individually rather than just in a social gathering situation. And so we were kind of seeking each other out, wanting to learn. We were going deeper, like if we went on a drive or like, you know, we drove me around or something, we talked about things and we learned more about each other's lives and our goals. And so we became closer, we intensified that relationship. Then there's integrating, and integrating is when partners begin to develop a sense of identity for their relationship with each other. So then it became like Andrew and I hung out a lot, and people knew we were hanging out by ourselves some. And so we weren't necessarily boyfriend and girlfriend, you know, like Facebook official or something, but we were still, people kind of knew something was going on. So we were and what happens is during that time, you start integrating your lives with each other. Some people, that integrating is a lot faster. Maybe that means moving in with each other. Maybe that means, you know, like actually, I don't know, just kind of making everyone know that you're together, whatever it is, but that's just kind of bringing you to integrating. Like that's what I think of when I think integrating, bringing your two lives together. And then there's bonding. And so bonding is when partners make their deep commitment formal and public through engagement, marriage, or civil union. So this can be, you know, just basically, this is when you're like saying we're together. I mean, maybe it is just engagement. Maybe it's like you can, something simple for like high school kids or for just high school kids, for everybody, but making it social media official, or maybe, you know, telling everybody, hey, we're officially together. But basically it's just that public, hey, we're one in some way, maybe not married, but we're one. And then we have the second part of this, which is kind of the de-escalation. And so not all relationships will go through this, but some will. And so if you think of a relationship that has ended in your life, then this is kind of what happens. So first, there's the differentiating part. So differentiating means that occurs when the partners begin to separate themselves from each other. So whenever I have liked a guy in the past and I've started kind of to want to break up, I definitely did this. I started to definitely separate myself. I would stop kind of interacting as much. Maybe I would just start with just not talking to him. Maybe not, I don't text or call as much, those kinds of things. The next stage is circumscribing. That happens when the partners are primarily living different lives and their conversations are increasingly limited in scope. So you notice that it comes back to that self-disclosure aspect where you're slowly like kind of losing your breadth, like you don't have as many topics to talk about, and you're also kind of getting more shallow, like you're not going as deep with each other. So it starts with distancing, but distancing sometimes then of course makes the self-disclosure aspect a little harder, which then makes the communication barrier start happening. And then that's what it leads to like feeling further away from someone. And then there's stagnation. And so stagnation is when couples move into, sorry, let me skip down. They're neither moving forward or backward in the relationship, but they've hit a point when they're not relating on an intimate level. So this is when, like, maybe you were actually, this is one of your closest people at one point, but now you don't feel close to this person. So it started with just like separation, a little bit of separation. Then it went to distancing and communication. And you notice that as communication is more distant, then the way you feel about the person becomes more distant. So this is when you start just kind of feeling just like meh about the person. Like it's just like it's not moving forward, it's not moving back, it's just there, right? So you're kind of to the point, like my friend Holly used to always say, she gets to a point where she just like doesn't care anymore, and what she calls kind of the breaking point. It's not that she's mad anymore, that she just doesn't care. That's kind of where I think stagnation is. And then avoidance stage. So the couple actively avoids interacting with each other so they will not have to face each other. I was really bad about that when I wanted to break up with guys growing up. Like I would just, but when I got to that point, I was just like, I don't want to talk to them. Like I wouldn't answer their calls, or I just would try not to see you because I wouldn't have to have that, because I knew it was coming. Like I knew the end was in sight and I didn't want to have to deal with it. Right. And I will say about the stagnation too, I think the stagnation is a really important part of the ending process, because I feel like that's where either you have to work really hard to move back, like to start going back up, to start feeling closer again, or that's kind of the point that you make the decision, okay, I see the end and I think that's what's coming, right? I think that's a really important part. So then you do the avoiding, and then the last thing is the terminating stage, and this is the final stage. And this is when you move into a post-relationship phase where they may or may not continue to have contact as separated individuals. So at that point, you go your separate ways. I remember I dated a guy in 8th grade. Of course, I thought I was in love with. He was my person, like we were gonna get married in 8th grade. But I remember like our lives were so integrated all through 8th grade. We did all this stuff together. We had all the same friends. And then it's like we broke up and bam, cut off communication. Even though we went to the same school, we still had the same classes. It was like, he's over there, I'm over here, no communication, right? That sometimes relationships happen like that. Sometimes the post-relationship, that person's still, and you're like, maybe you ended peacefully and it was okay, and you both felt like, this is just not what I wanted, and you went your separate ways. Or then sometimes you have to. Sometimes, like, if you get divorced and you have kids, or even if you weren't married and you had kids and you ended, you're still going to see each other because there's a child involved, right? So that it just kind of depends on where y'all are at and how that post-relationship is going to look. Okay, so the very last thing is dialogic communication and relationships. So this is basically just 4 tips to try to make your relationships better with communication. So first, balance how you express your feelings. Make sure you're listening and you're communicating your feelings, but you're also listening. But also, how you say things really matters. It's the how, how you make people feel. What are you saying to them? So balance how you express your feelings. Second, give benefit of the doubt. Like that's something we talked about before, is sometimes it's easy to assume people are out to get you, but a lot of times they aren't. Even in relationships, like I have to remind myself sometimes, especially if you're in a fight or anything, when you communicate with somebody, that it's easy to think, oh, you're just, out to get me. When really that's not the case at all. The person didn't mean to say it the way that they did, so try to give the benefit of that, and you would be surprised how much better a relationship can be. And then exercise empathy. And this doesn't mean just being sad for somebody. It means being able to truly try to see it from their point of view, being able to feel what they feel and understand why they might have done something they did or whatever it is. But empathizing with someone is going to build and strengthen a relationship. And you can do that through your communication style. And then invest time in your relationships. If you've ever had a friendship that you loved and you cared about, but it's just kind of dissipated, the number one reason is because you probably didn't communicate on a regular basis. I have a best friend in Northwest Arkansas, and it kills me to this day because we're just not as close anymore. But it's not even just distance, is that I don't communicate with her every day like I once did. right? Like I don't talk all the time with her. And because of that, it really put a void between us. And so we're having to come back, we're having to communicate more in order to build that closeness back. And so relationships truly are built on communication, on self-disclosure, how close you are, how much you communicate. Maybe you can't see that person, but you can communicate with them. So try to invest in your relationships and try to communicate on a regular basis. And that is chapter 13.